Hello ladies and gentlemen, you're watching NDTV. Since the election began, there has been a lot of discussion about how states have voted and if the dip in polling is actually significant to impact the overall electoral results. Now 6 phases of elections are over and the last one will be held on the 1st of June. The Lok Sabha elections so far have seen a 1.6 percentage point decrease in the turnout compared to 2019. In fact, 6 phases of polling so far have recorded an overall turnout of 65.6%, which is down from the 67.18 in the same seats in 2019. Now, these are what Election Commission numbers say. Now, of course, there are regional level variations. Voters in the east and northeast and many in the south of India typically have voted higher than those in the west, central and north of India. There have also been some exceptions, such as Telangana and Karnataka, where in some parts voter turnout has been a little more than others. But of course, there has been a general dip. Heat wave, migration, voter disinterest and maybe some other political factors. Now, what could have really played a part in the reduced polling numbers? Or are we reading too much into these numbers because the polling continues to be higher than pre-2014? That is what we will try and understand tonight. Joining us is a panel of esteemed guests. But first let's speak to psephologist Sanjay Kumar of the CSDS. Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for speaking to NDTV. I would like to start by asking you a very simple question, sir, and this is something that's very important for all of us to understand, including me. Nearly 65% of the seats saw a dip in turnout in percentage points, and 20% of them seem to have witnessed a reduced polling in terms of absolute numbers of voters that we know. Now, we know that, a high number of eligible voters were registered above the age of 18 in 2014. There was a slight increase in 2019 and 2024. But it's only in 2024 that the voter turnout seems to have dropped significantly. How do you see this assessment that there is a dip in turnout in percentage terms, but there's also a decline in voter turnout in absolute terms in over 125 or 130 of the total 485 constituencies that have gone to polls? How do you see that assessment, sir?
You said there is a significant decline. I don't think there is a significant decline. Because I don't consider 1.5 or 2% decline as a significant decline. As I have said earlier also, the problem is that we are comparing the turnout in 2024 with 2019 Lok Sabha election. The benchmark is very high. If you just compare with any other election, you might figure out that the turnout is very decent. Turnout is higher. So we are comparing it with an election which is an outlier in many respects. And in one respect, because this is the election which has witnessed the highest turnout. Not even the 1985 Lok Sabha elections, not even 1977 Lok Sabha elections witnessed such a higher turnout. So I don't give too much of importance like a massive decline in the voting turnout. It's just 1.5%.
Okay.
It can always happen.
Right. So what would your key takeaways be from these numbers, sir, that the ECI has put out?
Key takeaways, very difficult for me to figure out because one, yes, I think first, if I go by the election commission, if you look at the 7 days of polling, the 7 days which has been fixed for the polling, 6 days were not appropriate in terms of the day. 2 Mondays, 2 Fridays and 1 Saturday. This is not the 2 Saturdays. 2 Fridays, 2 Mondays and 2 Saturdays. These are not the good days to hold an election because people have the tendency to go for a long holiday.
Right.
One which is beyond anybody's control, which is a very hot temperature. The temperatures were soaring. Also, initially, if you remember, the first and the second phase witnessed a much lower turnout compared to the later one. Because in the first and the second phase, the narrative that this is a one-sided election was slightly stronger compared to what we see now in the 5th and the 6th phase. So if you compare the turnout between phases, so that the relationship is that if you see an election which is keenly contested, the turnout is likely to go higher. If you see the election as one-sided, the turnout is likely to, dip. And that is what explains, I think, if you look at the phase-wise turnout. So these are the 3 factors I would read from the turnout figures which has been released recently. But I am really surprised that on one side, we keep talking about one nation, one election. We are in a position to hold elections for all the state assembly and Lok Sabha together. But for one simple thing, turnout. We are getting figures, updated figures again and again after 5 days, 7 days. Yesterday also commission comes up with, it's like, how would you feel if you are a student appeared for class 10th and 12th exam? So the results have been announced and you get a number that you have got 92%. 10 days after that, you get a number from the board. Then no, it's not 92. It's 93.5. And then again you get a number. No, it's not 93. It's 90.8. What kind of a trust do you have on the examination system? That's what is happening with regard to the turnout figure. It has become a joke, I believe.
Absolutely, sir. I think that is so well said, because that's also led to a lot of anxiety and apprehensions even among reporters as to what is exactly the number. Should we wait for more time? Another thing, sir, turnout of women voters seems to have spiked in the last two phases. What do you think could explain this trend? Because Bihar and West Bengal, of course, seem to be the states there.
So look at these two states. Bihar is the state where the women turnout has been higher compared to the men turnout for the last 3 Lok Sabha elections. If you look at 2020 Lok Sabha election, it was 7% higher. Election before that was almost 5 or 6% higher. So this is a state where women turnout has been traditionally higher. Traditionally means I'm looking at last 10-15 years. Bengal, women turnout has been decent. I'm not sure whether it is higher compared to the men turnout, but Mamata Banerjee being at the helm of affairs, Mamata Banerjee being the chief minister and being the leader of a very strong regional party, she has been able to motivate the women voters to turn out to vote. I think these are the two factors, and these are the two states which contributes to a very large number of constituencies going to poll in the fifth or sixth rounds of polling.
Right.
Also, it applies to the 7th round of polling. I think that is what contributes to women higher turnout in fifth and the sixth phases of polling.
Right. Sir, also has interstate migration been a factor here, especially with regard to these two states?
I think so. That's also one factor. But if you look at the women turnout in the previous assembly elections in Bihar, we have figured out that it's not that men turnout has gone down. Men turnout has also gone up. Women turnout has also gone up. So migration is not the only reason why we see women turnout going up. It's not that relationship that since men turnout has gone down because of migration, automatically by default women turnout goes up.
Right.
Women turnout have also gone up. Men turnout have also gone up in Bihar Assembly elections 2020, 2015. But relatively, women turnout has become much higher compared to the men turnout. So migration is not the only factor which should be attributed to higher women turnout in Bengal, Bihar, or in some other states.
Right. So, sir, my last question to you: the dip in first 4 phases, and of course recovery in the last, later phases. India bloc is saying that the momentum picked up in their favor because more people turned out to vote. BJP is saying that after complacency, voters realized, and they're coming out in huge numbers. What kind of political messaging is in there? Which narrative do you think is more likely here?
So I think it is reasonable for political parties to assume that if there is a higher turnout, all political parties would claim, all political parties which are in the fray in that constituency or in that seat would claim that these are our voters who are turning out to vote in much bigger numbers and we get an advantage. I don't think I have any evidence to suggest that if voter turnout is higher in the 6th or the 5th round of election, or if in a particular constituency it is the voter of a particular party who have turned out to vote in much bigger numbers and it gives advantage to a particular political party. I don't think this is the situation when I would be in a position to assess or clearly say this is what has happened. I think the nature of political competition is driving the voting turnout. That's the single biggest factor which drives voter turnout. If the nature of competition between the competing parties is very intense, that's likely to increase the turnout, and we have seen that happening in many constituencies. If you compare constituency-wise turnout in many states.
Right.
There are enough examples of that kind. If you look at Karnataka, constituencies in Karnataka, if you look at the various constituencies in Rajasthan, so some of the constituencies which seems to have witnessed an intense competition, turnout has gone up. So the relationship is about nature of competition rather than figuring out voters of one particular party has turned out to vote in much bigger numbers or not.
So very quickly, sir, is that why Madhya Pradesh seems to be one of those states which has seen a big drop? Because largely, if you see places like Khajuraho, it's been a big drop. So is that also a lack of contest that led to this?
I think we will see a clear relationship once we know the results on June 4th. But my hunch is that yes, Madhya Pradesh election is likely to be completely one-sided. And in the one-sided election, that may have contributed to a very low turnout in a large number of constituencies in Madhya Pradesh.
Right. Thank you, Professor Sanjay Kumar, for explaining it so beautifully to us and how it's important to not really take outlier elections as the benchmark to decide what a lower voter turnout is. Thank you, Professor Sanjay Kumar, for joining us. Also joining me now is Mohan Kumaramangalam of the Congress Party, Guru Prakash Paswan of the BJP, and political and social commentator Aarti Jairath. Thank you all of you for joining me on this show. But before that, Amit Shah, the Home Minister, spoke to NDTV on the polling numbers, especially in Jammu and Kashmir. Let's listen into what he said.
कश्मीर 370 के समापन के बाद अब जो बम्पर वोटिंग सामने आई, दो इंटरप्रिटेशन हो सकते हैं कि एक तो ये मुख्य धारा के साथ इंटीग्रेट होने का मैंडेट हो संभवतः है, दूसरा ये है कि केंद्र सरकार से नाराजगी का वोट हो सकता है।
देखिए, ऐसा है, इसका एक ही इंटरप्रिटेशन हो सकता है कि मुख्य धारा के अंदर वो लोग शामिल हुए हैं। इसका मैं कारण बताता हूं। जब धारा 370 थी तब भी वो वोट नहीं डालते थे, और इस बार वोट किसने डाला? जमात इस्लामी और हुर्रियत के कुछ प्रमुख लोगों ने भी वोटिंग भी की और ये भी कहा कि हम भारतीय संविधान के तहत वोटिंग कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि अब जम्मू कश्मीर का संविधान तो है नहीं, डिमोलिश कर दिया गया है। जम्मू कश्मीर अब भारत के संविधान के तहत ही गवर्न हो रहा है। तो मैं मानता हूं नरेंद्र मोदी जी की कश्मीर पॉलिसी सफल हुई है। इतने सालों तक एपीसमेंट की पॉलिटिक्स से और एपीसमेंट की पॉलिसी से कश्मीर को संभालने का प्रयास किया गया। मोदी जी ने धारा 370-35 को समाप्त किया और घाटी में एक स्पष्ट संदेश भेजा कि आप भारत का हिस्सा हो, आपके ऊपर पूरे भारत का अधिकार है और पूरे भारत पर घाटी के लोगों का भी अधिकार है। और मैं मानता हूं इसके कारण वहां लोकतंत्र की नींव बड़ी मजबूत हुई है। केवल लोकसभा चुनाव नहीं, पंचायतों के चुनाव हुए, इसमें 90% तक वोटिंग हुई है। और ये लोकसभा का चुनाव में बाकी भारत के हिस्सों जितना ही वोट पहली बार 90 के दशक के बाद कश्मीर में हुआ है। मैं मानता हूं ये बहुत बड़ी सफलता है और हर भारतीय ने इसका स्वागत करना चाहिए।
Starting with you, Guru, how is your party, how is the BJP looking at this dip? You know, some people call it insignificant, some people say that it is significant. And especially if you see the urban seats or even states such as MP that saw good polling numbers just a few months ago in assembly polls, did the slogans of 400 Par or the predictability of the election in some ways did impact voter enthusiasm? Because in the later phases, voters seem to have picked up.
No, Vasudha, I think that comment is for people like Sanjay ji from CSDS and psychologist. For us political activists, it's very important to understand that historically, structurally, if you see the voter percentages since 2014, I was just looking at the data, it has been more than 66% after the advent of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And recently I saw the interview of Home Minister Amit Shah. That is also very encouraging and something that instills confidence, because after 35 years, I think after more than 3.5 decades, people in Jammu and Kashmir, because people used to say, "Kaun aayega vote dene, vote percentage kya hoga?" But such an encouraging 58 and 59% from areas like Pulwama, Kupwara, there's something which is really encouraging. For us, the biggest learning and the 2024 election is that at least political parties are also now taking some level of responsibility and ownership when it comes to increase in the voter percentage. If you realize that after the first and the second phase, the opposition started name calling that the lower voter turnout, it's only the responsibility of the Bharatiya Janata Party. But at least now it is a very good sign. It is a very positive indication for a democracy that entire political class, it is a matter of collective responsibility to ensure that there is a good voter percentage, there is a good voter turnout. And we are sure that after regularly and constantly Prime Minister Modi asking for voters to come out in large numbers, and it has to be looked beyond politics, because as a
Right.
Prime Minister, when you ensure that especially people from very vulnerable communities, you just asked Mr. Sanjay about women voter turnout.
Yeah.
We are also ensuring the minority voter turnout, minority women voter turnout, Dalit voter turnout, tribal voter turnout. And apart from Election Commission of India, political parties have also sort of come forward and are starting a positive campaign that people must come out and vote in large numbers.
Right.
It is a matter of responsibility for 1.4 billion people of India as an active citizen.
That's very important. Mohan Kumar Mangalam, I was looking at some data. Maharashtra, Bihar are some states that the opposition is extremely optimistic about. Polling has declined across all Lok Sabha seats in Mumbai, not limited to the opposition strongholds. Even in Mulund and Ghatkopar, which are seen as strongholds of BJP, there seems to be some decline. But of course, when you look at Delhi, there is another, there's a dip there as well. In Bihar, the dip has been consistent throughout the elections. That is where RJD and Congress are fighting together. But in Delhi, we really didn't see Mr. Kejriwal and Mr. Rahul Gandhi actually have those joint rallies. Has the opposition in some ways not been able to put forward a strong message of unity to, get voters out of their houses?
I wouldn't agree with that, Basudha. In fact, I'd say that the dip in voting seen by itself, I couldn't say objectively would favor either the BJP or the India bloc. There is no correlation one way or the other to a reduced voting leading to a favorable outcome for the incumbent or the challenger. But I will say that if seen in the context of the Prime Minister's rhetoric, which changed dramatically after the lower turnout in the first phase, you'd have to say that, his rhetoric betrayed confidence and it turned increasingly negative. And his entire narrative was more about why you shouldn't let Congress come to power rather than why you should allow BJP to retain power. And that told me in a lot of ways that the lower voter turnout is something that's actually hurting the BJP more than it is hurting the India bloc. Having said that, I think that both 14 and 19 were massive wave elections. 14 was a huge anti-incumbency wave. 19 was the Pulwama Balakot wave. And this particular election, if you listen to all the analysts out there, those who've been traveling on the ground, they'll tell you that there's no wave, either for, or I will even say there's no wave that they've felt against. There's just a simmering undercurrent is what has been talked about around.
Right.
And if there is no wave, then every election comes down to that seat. And people now are looking not only at turnout per seat, but also turnout on a booth level. I heard someone do an analysis the other day saying that XYZ booths in a particular constituency are Congress strongholds and the others are BJP. And they were trying to figure out which booths had more turnouts than the other.
Right.
So lower turnouts in hotly contested local elections become very hard to call. We'll really know on June 4th. But what I will say that the Prime Minister's own narrative tells me that the BJP is in trouble.
Right. Aarti, would you like to, it's a very interesting point both Guru and Mohan Kumar Mangalam have made. Guru is saying that, political parties have to think beyond politics to ensure that voters come out and participate. And Mohan has made this very critical point, which I also agree with, that sometimes the language of political leaders also puts people off. And that applies both sides. If there's a leader talking about wealth redistribution, there could also be a sense of apprehension. And there could be BJP leaders talking about a polarizing narrative that could, maybe not really get voters out. How much does an impact does the language of leaders have when it comes to voters' mind and their own, ability to go out and vote, ma'am?
Well, I would say that messaging is the key thing in a campaign. I think the most powerful campaigns are the ones that have, that are encapsulated in, say, a slogan. For instance, in 2014, Narendra Modi's campaign had some very, very pithy and attractive slogans like Achhe Din and, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. I think, this kind of narrative, these kind of slogans, this kind of messaging really, excites the imagination of the voter. And that's why in 2014 we saw that, of course, there was this huge anti-incumbency against the UPA government and all that. But that messaging really caught the imagination. And of course, in 2019, you didn't even need messaging because you'd had an event. You had an event like Pulwama, you had an event like Balakot. And I think, that in itself, the messaging was very powerful.
Right.
What I find missing in this election is that kind of messaging. The messaging has been actually very negative rather than positive, like, say, 2014 when you talked about Achete. So, you were appealing to, you were appealing to a voter's aspirations, a voter's dream.
Right.
Here, it's all been very negative. Either it's been very polarizing about, the Congress manifesto and minority appeasement and vote bank politics and so on and so forth. Or on the other side, that they will take away your reservations, they will rewrite the constitution, and, it's all very negative voting.
Okay.
And I think negative voting does impact, in some ways, turnout. I mean, you already have factors like the heat and, so on. And on top of it, if, the campaign is going to be so negative, it's not going to excite the voter's imagination, catch his imagination, and excite him or her enough to actually go out and vote.
Right.
So I think, the narratives are important. And the more positive a narrative, I think the more likely you are to get, a good feedback, a good, response from the voter.
Right.
The more negative the, narrative, the less likely the voter is to respond to you in a good way.
Absolutely. Guru, would you like to respond to that? However, I do believe that there are sections of voters and, it's also that the BJP has managed a sweep for 2 terms and it in some ways also understands what kind of language does a certain section of people want. But, tell me, this Uttar Pradesh with 17 seats has had second highest number of decline in the number of voters, and 17 seats have actually seen some sort of decline, significant, insignificant. Mathura seems to be there. In some ways, opposition is also saying that the enthusiasm around Pran Pratishta seems to have really waned off. Do you think that is one thing that maybe the BJP really hoped could have worked, or do you think it's the opposition voters who are not coming out in UP?
No, Vasudha, I think it's very important for us to understand, especially the opposition parties, when you very easily say that 14 was a wave election, 19 was a wave election, and I'm 100% sure I can say this with absolute certainty that on 4th June by 11 a.m., I'll say it again, on 4th June by 11 a.m., you would see all these people saying that 2024 was also a wave election.
Okay.
So I think just saying that it was a wave election and not making any effort, it speaks a lot on the side of the opposition as well. Point number 2, you see, to each his own. Prime Minister spoke about Modi ki guarantee. It was actually the Bharatiya Janata Party that was setting the narrative. What Aarti is speaking about, setting the positive narrative, I think 2 important takeaway as a young citizen, as a young political activist was Viksit Bharat in 2047 and Modi ki guarantee. And as far as the opposition is concerned, we all were observing that throughout the campaign, be it Mr. Sam Pitroda, Mr. Manishankar Iyer, Mr. Arvinder Lovely, we saw opposition senior leaders deserting the political party, deserting the political narrative, and it was the Bharatiya Janata Party. So I think you can selectively choose certain things, but if you do a critical analysis, and I want to propose that some of you senior journalists can initiate a study of how many times Prime Minister spoke about Viksit Bharat, Modi ki guarantee, and how many times what you guys call polarizing tone and tenor. I think 90% of the times.
Mohan Kumar Mangalam, he's made a very interesting point here, because as a journalist, I know that many of us actually fail to understand when there's a wave, and it's only on the result day that we understand that there was actually one. How do you respond to that? Because we're talking so much about numbers, maybe these numbers don't really matter. At the end of the day, the numbers are still high in most states.
We'll see on June 4th if it does turn into a wave or not. But I just say that the way the election is being conducted, it doesn't seem like it's a very big pro-incumbency wave, or it doesn't seem like people are voting on some overarching issue. As it was rightly pointed out by our fellow panelists that there were, great slogans. There was the great Gujarat model sold in 2014. There was a presidential election conducted for the first time after a long time in the country. And then 19, of course, was Pulwama Balakot. Now, I find it a little amusing that Guru is comparing the Prime Minister's utterances to someone who's now since resigned and was just the chairman of the Overseas Congress party, and an ex-MP who holds no position in the Congress party. I mean, you have to have some level of equivalence, but you can't draw this at all. The Prime Minister's overwhelming negative rhetoric, Musalman, Mutton, Mangal Sutra,
Right.
he just doubled down on all the lies he told about the Congress manifesto as well during the campaign. And there is one thing I will disagree with our fellow panelists, which is that, if you
Right.
look at all the US elections also, right from congressman to senator,
Right.
the last 2 weeks of their elections are always dominated by negative campaigning. And negative news spreads faster, and negativity actually gets people riled up more to come to vote. This is why Mr. Modi followed that familiar pattern that we've seen with many elections.
Okay.
Whether it worked in his favor or not remains to be seen.
We're just glad it's the last phase of elections. Thank you so much for joining me on this show.